Hey guys, it's Chef Tom here. Today we're going to talk about smoking. And no, it's not the thing that y'all are doing out by the back door. This is a multi-part series where we discuss the different cooking methods and how you can use them to comfortably cook anything. So there's a couple of different ways to go about smoking. You can have direct smoking and you can have indirect smoking. Indirect is probably the best way to go. That's for your larger cuts of meat that have more connective tissue. Indirect smoking is also referred to as offset smoking. You have like a chamber or your wood or your charcoal is kind of off to the side, which means that the temperature is a little bit lower and that smoke is kind of enveloping the meat or the vegetables, imparting its flavor without cooking it super hot. Smoking can also be referred to as barbecuing. It's slow smoking over a long period of time. So when you hear people refer to barbecue, it's often meant as a smoking technique. The temperatures that you're looking at when you're doing an indirect heat is like 225 to 250 degrees. It allows that meat or vegetables to sit on there for hours and like slowly absorb smoke and slowly cook over time. You can also have direct smoking, which is kind of what happens when you're grilling. Your food is closer to the heat source, so it's a lot quicker of a smoke, a lot quicker of a cook. Smoking with direct heat could be like 300 degrees to 350 degrees ideally. I mean, you could do it even hotter than that. Indirect smoking is ideal for your tougher cuts of meat like brisket, pork shoulder, ribs, whereas your direct heat is more appropriate for like chicken or pork chops or turkey or steaks or vegetables. So there's different types of ways you can go about smoking also, depending on the equipment that you have. Put a list of the smokers up here in the corner. I'll also put some links down in the description for all the equipment that I suggest using. You're not necessarily limited to having a type of smoker. I mean, you can smoke in like a metal pan if you want. You could ignite some wood chips, kind of keep it off to the side, put your meat like over to the other side of the pan, cover it with foil, and I mean, that's a smoking process in itself, and it doesn't even involve a heavy piece of equipment. It just involves a metal pan. I've seen that done before. But I mean, you can also smoke on a grill. If you're gonna do the indirect smoking on the grill, you would have either your charcoal and your wood off to one side and your meat off to the other side, or if it's a gas grill, you could have your burners turned up onto one side, have like some wood chips or something in a foil packet, and that would be producing smoke, it'd be producing heat. It just depends on the effect that you want. You have drum smokers. They're like what you would think is like a big metal drum where you have you have different levels in there. You have your heat source and your smoke at the bottom, and then you can place whatever you're smoking on different shelves far away from the flame and the heat source, and that'll envelop it and smoke. You have pellet smokers. They kind of look like your typical grill. They have like a side box where you put your pellets in there, and it's kind of like a controlled process. It'll control the air, it'll control the temperature. It's almost like a set it and forget it kind of thing. You have a vertical smoker, which can be either gas operated or electric, where it's like a tall box that's skinny. You put your chips down at the bottom. The temperature is controlled by either the electric element or the gas. Yeah, it uses chips typically. It'll produce smoke. You have different shells in there. You open it up. I've seen a lot of vertical smokers. A lot of beginning at-home smokers will use that. I've seen them used in professional environments as well. You have ceramic smokers, good for like small amounts of smoking. It's a controlled environment. It'll give you like a low and slow cooking. It's powered by charcoal, but you can add wood chips to it. Temperature is regulated on there. Airflow is regulated. Most professionals will use an offset smoker. It's a chamber off to the edge of a box. It's an indirect heat. You have your chamber over here. The wood's burning in there. It's moving into another area where your items are at. The smoke is kind of bellowing around in there. It's getting heat, but not direct heat. Offset smokers can be a little bit more difficult to operate. It involves more like watching it, monitoring the oxygen levels, monitoring the smoke flow, monitoring your heat. So yeah, it's more for professionals, but I mean, I've been using offset smokers for years. It's the one that I'm most familiar with. Other pieces of equipment that you're gonna need for smoking will be thermometers. I'll leave a list of different thermometers down in the description as well. You have the regular thermometer that you would find on the top of the grill that kind of measures just the ambient temperature, the temperature inside the grill and the smoker, the air temperature. You also wanna have something like a probe thermometer where you can insert it into the meat and determine what that internal temperature is for the meat. If you don't have a thermometer and you're just guessing at if it's done or not, you won't have the best outcome. So you also have Bluetooth thermometers and Wi-Fi thermometers, which lets you kind of monitor the temperature from afar. Like you can be sitting on your couch and be like, oh, well, yeah, it's at 165 degrees. Like, okay. When you're dealing with heavy meats, you're gonna wanna have some sort of like gloves or tongs. If you're dealing with a small piece of meat, tongs would be fine, but if you're dealing with a whole brisket, it's kind of hard to maneuver with, like, even if you have 2 pairs of tongs, so you're gonna need some like sort of protective gloves. There's oftentimes you'll need to rotate the meat around, so having gloves is the easiest way to do that. There's silicone gloves, there's leather gloves, you have fabric and synthetic gloves. Each have their benefits and weaknesses, but being able to use your hands as a tool to move the meat around is the best way to do it, in my opinion. Like, smoking can be very scientific. Having a diary can help you track what you did and how you can improve what you did. Because trying to remember all that stuff, you'll just forget it. Keeping a little notebook handy with the temperatures that you had, the wood that you had, how much wood did you have to add during the cooking process, what temperature was it when you took it off. All these things can help you improve your smoking game. And you can learn from your mistakes. So wood, there's all kinds of different types of wood that you can use. You can use oak, hickory, mesquite, apple, pear, cherry wood, beech, pecan. You can either use big logs of wood, or you can use wood chips, or you can use pellets. Wood chips will oftentimes produce more smoke with less heat. Wood logs obviously will create a lot of heat. And then you have pellets, which pellets are kind of like a ground up, like sawdust type thing that is very uniform. So how much wood are you gonna need? You only need as much wood as you need smoke. So adding too much wood and having too much smoke can add a bitter flavor to your food. If you have too much smoke added to your food, after an hour it'll become incredibly bitter if you're smoking like a bigger piece of meat. Bigger pieces of meat like brisket and pork butt will need a lot more smoke than, say, chicken, turkey, or cheese, or vegetables. 10 ounces of wood for brisket and pork is a good number to start off with. And then as that dies down, you'll need to add more wood to it. If you're using wood chips, it's going to be a smaller amount. If your heat source is not wood, like say it's gas or propane or electricity, you don't need as much. You just need as much wood as you need smoke. So let's talk about seasoning and brines and rubs and sauces. Salt is a natural tenderizer. You're going to need it for the smoking process. Also, it obviously adds flavor. As far as dry rubs and salt is concerned, you can add that to the meat right before you smoke it. Unless you're gonna brine it. Brining is a water and salt bath that you can throw your meat in, and that'll allow the salt to penetrate the meat. It'll make the meat more moist. If you're gonna use sauce, I would use it towards the end, because otherwise all the sugars in there might burn and whatnot. Or you do it slowly during the cooking process, like at least halfway through, start adding your sauce to it. Now, whether you add sauce to your barbecue or your smoked meats, that's a whole nother discussion that I'm not gonna get into. All right, so let's talk meat. The types of meats that you're using, you have those bigger, thicker, more connective tissue type meats. They also happen to be cheaper. That's one of the reasons that smoking and barbecue came about, is people wanted to figure out, how can I use these cheap pieces of meat that are really tough that people don't like, how can I use those in a way that people love? And that's how smoking and barbecue came about. You got pork shoulder, you have brisket, you have ribs, but you can also smoke tender cuts of meat like steaks, fish, pork chops, chicken, turkey. You can smoke vegetables, you can smoke cheese, you can smoke, I've seen people smoke ice. They're using it for what they call a smoka. It's a smoked ice mocha. But yeah, the low slow cooking method, it helps retain the moisture in the meat. If you're cooking it too quick, all the moisture is going to evaporate. But if you cook it low and slow, then it helps retain that moisture. And that's, besides the crust, the moisture of the inside of the meat, the fat and the marbling and all that connective tissue from those bigger, tougher cuts of meat, really add like a really nice moist mouthfeel. I'd say an easy meat to begin with, if you're not very familiar with barbecuing, is pork butt, also known as pork shoulder. It's a big old piece of meat. It's got a lot of fat on there. It's got a lot of connective tissue. It's gonna take that low, slow cook. Medium level of smoking would probably involve ribs. The St. Louis spare rib is probably a better option to start off with because they're more consistent across. If you're using the Texas style spare ribs, one side might be a little thicker than the other side. So one side might get cooked and charred a little bit more than the other side. And then a pro level of smoking probably be something like brisket. Briskets will involve a lot of moving around. You have one side that's thinner than the other side, so that's why you would want to move it around. The amount of fat that you leave on a brisket or other types of meats kind of open for debate as well. Generally speaking, I would say if you're going to eat the fat, then go ahead and leave it on. I'd leave a little bit of fat on there just as a protective layer, but enough that you could actually digest or like eat. Keep this in mind, if you leave the fat on, you're not going to get that kind of penetrating crust on the actual meat portion of it. So if you take the fat off and you're not eating that, then you're basically not getting that really delicious crust on the actual portion of the meat that you will be eating. And that's some of people's favorite part about eating barbecue and smoked meats, is that nice crust on there. That nice crust is often referred to as bark. It's just from the smoke and the rubs and the moisture. It's a nice chewy crust that can often be gooey, just kind of mouth-watering. Like my mouth is watering right now thinking about it. What you have going on there is the Maillard reaction. I speak a lot about the Maillard reaction in my videos. It's the browning of proteins, amino acids, and carbohydrates. You're gonna wanna develop a nice crust when you're smoking meats and doing barbecue. So typically when I'm starting my fire, I'll start with a coal base. You have little like chimney things, or you can put your coals in there and you can light it with some paper underneath and let those coals get all nice and red hot, and throw them on the grill, spread them out, and then I'll start throwing my wood on. If I'm using an offset smoker, this is how I'll do it. Another area up for debate is whether you should soak wood chips or not. My take on that is it's only gonna make your cooking inconsistent, the temperature wise. You can soak your wood chips for a long time, but that water is not really penetrating the inner side, the inner pieces of that wood. So what you have happen is you have the wood kind of smoldering for a while, and then as soon as that water evaporates, it just ignites like any other wood would. So I mean, your mileage may vary. It's something you can experiment with. When it comes to smoking and barbecuing, people have very strong opinions on how to do things. So I mean, whatever works, works. There's 1,000 ways to skin a cat. It's all about experimentation. So when you are grilling and smoking on whatever piece of equipment you're doing, you typically will want to get some sort of like sear or crust on there to help with the bark. You can cook the meat on top of like with the direct flames for a bit, get that nice sear, get that nice Maillard reaction, and then set it off to the other side where you have, where the heat isn't at and where that smoke can envelop it. It can cook low and slow. Another thing I like to do is I'll get like a little disposable like aluminum pan of water, and I'll put it near the coals, and that'll kind of create some evaporation going on. Keep some of that moisture in the air. Just makes for a better end product. It helps with like getting that bark on there kind of like moist. Getting that bark on there, you kind of want it to be moist, but not too moist, because then you can't get that Maillard reaction. So it's kind of like a fine balance. So you're gonna want to create like a high pressure system. So you have the smoke going, you have the heat going. It's creating a high pressure system where it's pushing the air out of whatever containment you have the smoking happening in. And you can control the smoke by controlling the flames, basically. The more flames there are, you'll have more heat, but you also have less smoke. So controlling the oxygen that's entering the chamber will affect how much smoke that you're producing and what type of smoke that you're producing. You can control the heat by controlling the amount of oxygen that enters the smoking chamber. So clear smoke is good, really dark smoke is not good. You can cut down the dark smoke by controlling the amount of oxygen. You want more oxygen if the smoke's really dark. You don't need like huge billowing clouds of smoke. What you want to have is some really nice kind of clear smoke, continuous smoke, not huge billowing clouds. You don't want your neighbors to think that your house is on fire. And too much smoke will make your food taste bitter, so be careful. Oftentimes I'll kind of stop smoking towards the end and I'll just have like a low heat. I mean, you only need as much smoke as you want to impart that smoke flavor to the food. The rest of the part is just kind of the slow cooking. And then once you kind of got things rolling, you don't want to look in there every couple of minutes. You want to kind of let it do its thing. Once you get more comfortable doing it, you don't want to be looking in there every 20 minutes because you're just going to let that smoke out. You're going to be introducing oxygen. And it's going to be very inconsistent. So once you become more comfortable smoking, the less you'll have to poke around in there. So there's also cold smoking. It's a very extreme end of indirect smoking where there's like very little heat, if any at all. You kind of have that smoke from afar and it's just kind of getting around the food and imparting that smoking flavor to it. I've done that with raw fish before. Brine raw fish and then smoke it, and then you can cook it separately later on to get that perfect temperature. You're going to want to do that with cheese, obviously. Cold smoking cheese. One of the oldest forms of preservation is cold smoking, where they would just have chambers where your meats are hanging and you're just kind of letting that food dry out and like collect smoke, and it acts as a preservative. So how will you know when the meat is done? I'll throw a meat cheat sheet up here in the corner, and it's just kind of like a suggested amount of time or temperature that your end product to be depending on what type of meat that you're doing. There's different formulas that you can use to determine like how long it's going to take to cook something like, say, brisket or pork butt. About 1.5 hours per pound is a typical amount of time that you'll need to smoke something for. If you're at that like 225 to 250 degree range, depends on the temperature really and how thick your item is. At 225 degrees, it's going to take a 8-pound brisket like 12 hours or so. And that's why you want to use a thermometer so you can get like the precise amount of cooking that you want. Well, thanks for watching. I hope you got a lot of information out of this video. If you did, please hit the like and subscribe. And stick around for our other videos on the different cooking methods.